Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Assalamu alaikum again to everyone. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me on this very important topic, role of Zakah as a tool, Islamic finance tool in realizing the sustainable development goals. Now, in terms of the background, as was mentioned by Sister Aisha, SDGs are something which has been agreed upon by all the countries of the world through the United Nations. And when it was launched in 2015, they already mentioned that the SDGs are very ambitious and they will require a lot of resources. And during that time, a UN report estimated that the gap to finance the SDGs would be close to 2.5 trillion US dollars annually. And this would be mainly in developing and emerging economies. Now, of course, with the COVID, this number has increased further. As we know that COVID has pushed back the progress of SDGs significantly. And these gap has to be in some ways filled by from different sources. Not the government cannot do it itself. The private sector has to be involved. And also the third sector, which includes non-profits, also should be involved. And of course, in Muslim societies, Zakah is one of the potential sustainable source of funding, especially the social goals of the SDGs. And as was mentioned, there are different estimates of the potential Zakah which can be collected annually, which runs into hundreds of billions of dollars. I've done my estimation, and it can be somewhere between 125 to close to $300 billion. There was an IDB estimate which even talks about close to 1 trillion US dollars. Now, as has been mentioned, and I mean, this is the basic thing is that Zakah is a tool of empowerment and poverty alleviation. And I think Sister Aisha had very nicely shown links between the SDGs and Zakat. I think when we look at SDGs and Zakat, there are three primary SDGs which directly link to Zakat, and these are no poverty, no hunger, and inequalities. And then we have some other supporting SDGs like good health, good education, affordable housing, clean energy, which also supports these primary SDGs of no poverty, zero hunger, and reduced inequalities. Now, if we look at the achievement, and that's where the graph actually came up, this was taken from an annual report of SDG, the progress report. And I had collected some figures for the OIC member countries, 56 OIC member countries, in terms of their progress in goal number 1, no poverty, goal number 2, zero hunger, and goal number 10, reduced inequalities. We see that of the 56 member countries, only 5 member countries of OIC, they are in some ways achieving the goal of no poverty. So the remaining 53 countries, actually they are facing challenges to meet these goals. So for hunger, actually none of the OIC countries are meeting the goal of zero hunger. And we have only one country of the 56 countries meeting the goal of reduced inequalities. So we see that there's a significant gap in terms of what the objectives of SDGs are and the current status of OIC member countries. There was another graph, very interesting graph, which I wanted to share with you. And this relates to the income inequality. And it is, actually, I was also very surprised to see this graph. And this graph was taken from World Inequality Report 2018. That's the latest they had published. And there they show the top 10% income GDP going to the 10 10% of the households. So the richest 10%, how much of the GDP goes to them? In Europe, or how much is the wealth or the income going to them? In Europe, the top 10% of the population, they get 37% of the income. But the interesting thing in the graph was that the worst distribution of income was in the Middle East. 61% of the income goes to the top 10% of the population. Now, this means that the distribution of income actually gives different countries and different regions. The worst is in the Middle East, where 61% of the income goes to the top 10% of the rich households. Now, if you look at this, that means that the zakah is not working at the macro level. The distribution of income in Muslim countries and also the SDGs are not being achieved. Now, of course, there is a gap in terms of the potential and the reality, and Sister Aisha and also the brothers who commented on her presentation, they have identified a lot of gaps. I think the concept is there, and we know that in history it was done well. The problem is of implementation, definitely. And of course, there have been different suggestions which have been given in terms of implementation. I think, as was mentioned, there are three key issues. There are problems related to collection, there are problems related to disbursement and impact, and the final problem relates to the organizational issues in terms of implementing zakah during contemporary times. Now, in terms of zakah collection, I think the problem is that most of us give our zakah as individuals. It is not being institutionalized, so the impact is not there. Individuals pay zakah in a dispersed manner, and Dr. Omar Farooq mentioned about this, that once we have paid our zakah, we are not worried about the impact. And actually, if you're paying zakah individually, I don't think we can expect any impact. It has to be institutionalized. The zakah collection has to be done by an organization, and the implementation has to be planned in a way that it can create impact. And in terms of zakah collection, I think there are some other issues which also have been highlighted. One of these issues relates to the contemporary zakatable assets. The wealth nowadays is very different than the wealth of the past. We have a new kind of assets, financial assets, crypto assets, among others. And all of these are zakatable assets because they are the new categories of wealth. So I think the collection will increase a lot when all of these assets are included in the wealth which can be on which zakah should be paid. And I think the other thing which also has been highlighted by a few is the literacy part. I think a lot of people who want to pay zakah, they don't know how much to pay zakah, what are the assets they have, and so there has to be in some ways more literacy about zakah itself. Of course, it is a religious duty, as was mentioned. It is a financial ibadah, but to perform this ibadah, we must have knowledge. Just as we have knowledge about performing salah, we have to have knowledge about zakah. And I think this actually is lacking in a lot of cases. I mean, if you talk to a common person, it's very difficult for them to understand what is the zakah they have to pay every year. In terms of zakah disbursement, again, this has been mentioned. I think there are some people who need zakah for consumption, but bulk of it should be used for productive purposes. It should be actually used to empower people. And another, I think, area where it should be used for during contemporary times is to increase resilience against risks. Just like there is inequalities in the distribution of income and wealth, there's also inequalities in the distribution of risk. What happens is that whenever a negative shock like a COVID hits, the poorest are the hardest hit and they are least protected. And actually with every negative shock, it causes further inequalities. And I think this is one of the points which Dr. Omar Farooq mentioned in terms of we have to understand how poverty in some ways is generated within societies. And one of the ways, I think, one of the key ways in which poverty in some ways perpetuates is through negative shocks. Whenever there's a negative shock, it is the poorest who actually bear the burden of the shocks, and they move down to even further in the poverty, vicious circle of poverty. So I think we have to think, given that we live in risk societies nowadays, we have to really think of using zakah to increase resilience towards risk. And finally, the point I want to make was the institutionalization of zakah. As was mentioned, if we pay individually, it doesn't have impact. During contemporary times, most of the Muslims countries, they cannot trust their governments. As I say, in some countries, of course, they're doing well. So I think the key role here is with civil society. The civil society has to play this role to actually implement zakah. And if you look at contemporary success stories of zakah implementation, you will see that these are done by civil societies. These are not done by governments. These are done by non-profit organizations, people who come together with a good intention of actually implementing zakah during contemporary times. There's a need for institutionalization of zakah because we need to have impact, and we cannot have impact unless we pool the zakah and manage it efficiently. So there is a need for organizational capacity building within the civil societies. I'm involved with Zakah, the National Zakah Foundation worldwide here and UK. And interestingly, we have our National Zakah Foundation in UK. You will be surprised to know that the CEO of this organization was an investment banker. So he has joined this bank and he's basically running the Zakah organization. So we need to have professionals who come and run these organizations because it is actually in some ways a complex organization. If you think of the collection and if you think of the distribution and the impact, these need skills and knowledge, which I think in most Zakah organizations it is lacking. Of course, there are issues about efficiency and effectiveness. There are issues about transparency. I think one of the key problems with a lot of non-profits in Muslim world, both Waqf and Zakah, and we face this a lot when we do research, is lack of transparency. You have to understand that these Zakah organizations and Waqf organizations, they are built on trust, and you cannot build trust unless everything is transparent. And the other important issue moving forward is to introduce technology and digitalization, and this was highlighted by Dr. Aisha. And finally, I think if we institutionalize Zakah, one of the benefits we can get is that through this civil society institution, we can actually educate people about Zakah. Before I end, I just want to mention a few things about the COVID SDGs and Zakah. As was mentioned, the COVID has affected the SDG achievement significantly. Actually, there were some studies which in some ways indicated that close to 500 million people may move back to poverty. So the gains of the last 13 years actually will be in some ways gone because of the COVID. And again, as I mentioned, any negative shock, including COVID, is affecting the poor more than the rich. And actually, if you look at the statistics, the rich, they have increased their wealth during COVID. And recently, I saw that the 10 richest persons in America, their wealth increased by $540 billion during 2020. So while most of the people were losing jobs, the 10 richest people in America, their wealth increased. The increase was $540 billion. Now, the interesting thing is, and this relates to COVID and also Zakah, that one of the impact of COVID has been on civil societies also. For example, in UK, the charities, they actually were some estimates that they will lose £4 billion pounds in donations because the income of people have gone down. And another estimate indicated that maybe close to 60 to 70% of the charities will close down because their incomes are in some has gone down because a lot of people have lost their income. Now, interestingly, Zakah is not income based; it is wealth based. Usually, income goes down, but the wealth, it is more or less stable than the income. So when it comes to zakat, we noticed that the zakah actually was not affected. Zakah organizations were not affected like the other charities. And again, I have some numbers from National Zakah Foundation, 2019 versus 2020. And the number of applications for people who wanted to receive zakah, it increased from 7,000 plus to 19,000 over 1 year. So the implication is that if a lot of Muslims actually were affected by COVID-19, they lost their jobs. So the number more than doubled. There were 19,000 applications plus applications who wanted to actually receive zakah from National Zakah Foundation. And the amount disbursed increased from 2.9 million pounds to 3.7 million pounds. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the zakah institution, because its income comes from wealth, actually is more resilient to negative shocks. And as we see in terms of the numbers, the zakah collection, at least in the case of the National Zakah Foundation, it increased, whereas most of the UK charities, their income actually went down. So with this note, I want to thank the organizers again for giving me this opportunity to speak to the audience here. And I think, as has been mentioned, this is a tool which is not being used, has a lot of potential, but is underutilized. And there is a need to actually develop the operational models. The concepts are there, but operational models are lacking. And I personally feel that the civil society has a very important role to drive this very important institution, religious institution, forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, our honorable guest of honor, Professor Dr. Habib Ahmed, for his wonderful speech.